Well, good to see you all in the room and good to see you all online. My name is Katie Murphy. I'm delighted that you have chosen to come to this cultivation presentation. I know that there were some other good options, and I'm glad that they're being recorded because I really want to go to them as well, or I really want to review them as well after the fact. So before we get into it, I'd love to just open us up in a word of prayer, and we'll get started from there. Lord, thank you for just this opportunity to be gathered as your creatives. Thank you for what you've done for us, and thank you for this. Thank you for the creativity that we've inherited from you. And Lord, I just pray that you would tune our ears and our eyes and our minds and our hearts and our words to what you would like us to say and hear today. And I just pray that you would just continue to knit us together as a community for your glory. It's in your son Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. So we'll start with an introduction, tell you a little bit about myself, so you can get to know me a little bit better. And then we will have, we'll talk through some working definitions of what I mean when we're talking about cultivating creative time and space. And I think a really key ingredient to the cultivation of community is wondering. So we'll talk a little bit about wondering and also gardening. So there'll be a gardening theme throughout the presentation. We'll do a little walk down memory lane to talk about how this all started and how God called me into this, and then talk about and sort of reflect upon how God prepares us for different things that he calls us to. I'll give some examples of my own life and can reflect upon some of the ways in which he's prepared you and maybe is preparing you in the season that you're in. I will be going through some different examples and ideas of ways in which I have cultivated creative time and space, or I've seen other people cultivate creative time and space, and just the lessons learned that I've learned through all of that. I really loved the format of Steve Thrall's presentation today, where it was all just like, this is what I've learned. It's going to be a lot of that because I'm still learning, but wanted to share some things I've learned along the way, and then give us an opportunity to reflect on the application of what we learned together today. So I was trying to find a picture of myself to kind of embody who I am, but ultimately my name is Katie, just Katie, not Kathy, not Kathleen. It's just plain old Katie. First and foremost, I'm a follower of Jesus, and so my life, the foundation of my life, is built on doing the best I can to love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love others as myself. And I am the newest teammate to the staff development team with ACT International, which is so exciting to me. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know all of you and seeing how I might be able to come alongside of you in your ministry journeys. In addition to that, I am an artist, a musician, a writer, a gardener, actually more of a gatherer versus a gardener, but I do use the garden as a way of gathering people. So you'll see that in just a little bit, and just a curious human all around. And I also have a background in corporate, as a corporate training specialist. So the majority of my career has been in corporate training and just developing training materials and welcoming people into a new organization, and just really, really passionate about helping people do their jobs well. And so a little bit to the picture, Fight for Joy. My pastor, I going through a little bit of a rough patch a few years ago, and she had encouraged me with fighting for joy. So I put it down on paper and slipped on my ballet slippers. And, for those who fight for joy, we know, joy doesn't always come easy. And sometimes I got to put on my ballet slippers to remind myself not to take life so seriously, to surrender it in praise, and to restore a sense of playfulness. And sometimes I just wear them when I'm doing the chores to make things more fun. So you got to keep it light and easy. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about cultivating creative time and space? So when I considered defining this for all of us to get us on the same page, I thought a little formula might help us get there. And granted, life does not work in formulas ever. I'm always looking for one. There really aren't a lot of formulas that we can deduce life down to, but I did think that there was a way to kind of think about this together. And so the main thing, obviously, at the top is prayerfully considering all of these things, but breaking down each one of these. So cultivate. Cultivating is preparing and using land for crops or gardening. It's breaking up the soil in preparation for sowing or planting. It's raising or growing plants. And there's also the element of trying to acquire or develop something. So that's our cultivation piece. And with creative, lots of different definitions for creative, but some of them, marked by an ability or a power to create, given to creating, relating or involving the imagination or original ideas. So we've got that combo. We've got the cultivation, we've got the creative, and then that's within, how do we do that within a contained amount of minutes or hours within a context or an environment. So that's our space that we're talking about. And the hope with all of this is that by combining all of those things, we create an invitational environment for the sake of growing relationships, serving others, and ultimately seeing what God does with it, because He's the one that makes things grow. And so, as I mentioned, I think there's one more really critical ingredient, and that is wondering. So, so the story goes from my mom that when I was born, I didn't cry. I just started looking around the room really, really intently. And I don't remember that, obviously, but it doesn't surprise me because that's kind of what I do as an adult as well. So if you see me from across the room and I'm just kind of like looking around, observing things, don't be alarmed. I'm just wondering about something. You can even ask me about what I'm wondering about. Hopefully it's something good. But the great thing about the word wondering is that it has some pretty fun definitions. And so one of them is, that whole admiration and amazement. And then there's the second component of expressing curiosity. And when I was thinking about this and developing this presentation, I thought, how cool is that? Because those are really necessary components in our initial and our continual lifelong walk with God. And, the initial admiration and amazement of what He's done for us, and then over time, just continuing to try to stay in that posture of just praise and admiration, and then seeking to understand, asking questions, walking alongside of Him. And I think there's also another element to wondering. There's the entering into conversations, wondering as well. So it can really, if you go into conversations wondering about things, it puts you in that seeking to understand kind of posture, which can be very invitational for people sharing more about themselves, especially in a ministry type of environment. And so one of the ways that I've been learning about ACT is I've been going back to gathering videos and watching old ones and just trying to get to know what it's all about. And one of the videos that I watched was Lou Flagg, who's the chairman of the board for ACT. In 2018, he had spoken about a book called God Space. And so I was so excited. I'm like, oh, cultivating creative time and space, like that's what I feel called to do. And so to have this book referenced, I immediately bought it, of course. And it's God Space, where spiritual conversations happen naturally. And so would recommend it if you haven't read this book. But I noticed one of the chapters, chapter 6, is wondering your way into spiritual conversations. There's a few different ways. There's the serving your way, there's the listening, there's wondering, there's noticing. There's a lot of different things that we can do as we enter into these types of spiritual conversations with a great deal of intentionality. And so I'll just read to you the very beginning of chapter 6. There's a little wanted ad, and it says wanderers, wanted ad. The job description is to explore the innermost space where the intellect, will, and emotions converge to form a worldview. To do this job well, the applicant must be able to, 1, create relational environment safe enough for others to openly share what they believe, 2, reflectively listen, and 3, raise reflective questions to help others think through the implications and even the inconsistencies of their beliefs. And so I thought that was a really neat way of breaking it down in thinking about wondering in the context of entering into conversations with a sense of wondering, not only the wondering that we have for God, but also the wondering that we have for the people that he's created. So with that said, I thought we could wonder a little bit by looking. These are just some photos to kind of get us in that sense of wondering. It's kind of like that sharing my favorite things. So these are a few of my favorite things. It's persimmon season in California. And I don't know if I have any other persimmon lovers out there.
I have persimmon tree.
You have persimmon tree. Okay, we're going to your place after. Okay, how cool. They're so beautiful. I mean, the color of them. And then if you slice them from the bottom, they have that gorgeous star on the inside. Like, thank you, God. Thank you for that. Ever look at the intricacies of a flower and just how intricate the design is from our creative creator. And then one of my favorite things that I like to do when I chop cucumbers is just make sure that I take a little moment to hold it up to the light and just to admire and thank God for that beautiful design of the inside of a cucumber and the seeds. And so, that's part of the wondering and the posture that I try to go into these types of environments with. And scripture, talks about fruit, bearing fruit, the fruit of the spirit, the fruit of wisdom. And as we go forward, as I mentioned, we'll continue on this garden theme. So, in the description of the session today, I talked about Imago Dei being Latin for created in the image of God. And many of you are probably familiar with that term. But, the first thing that we are his image bearers. So the first thing we learn about God is that he is creative, and his first garden was a masterpiece. And as his image bearers, he's designed us to collaborate and co-create with him in this garden that he's provided. And so I grew up with gardens my whole life, but I really didn't start pondering up close and personal the spiritual principles that gardens and the scriptures can teach us until I moved in January of 2020. So we have a grove of fruit trees and a community garden space in my apartment complex that I can see from my living room window. And it was just a dirt plot that grew weeds when I first moved in. And as part of kind of coping with the intensity and the isolation of COVID, a neighbor and I started cultivating the garden together. And as I worked in the dirt and planting the plants, pulling the weeds, I started really thinking about the various truths and metaphors that we see throughout scripture about organic growth and how we partner with God and how he provides these incredible natural materials and ultimately is the one producing the growth, but he invites us to participate in that cultivation and care process. And so what was once a dirt plot in 2020 is now a thriving garden by means of co-creating with God, who makes things grow. And in addition to growing fruit and vegetables and flowers, it's also become a hub of community growth as we host art and music gatherings for the neighborhood children and teach them how to cultivate and care for the garden as well. So the common area has provided this space for us to grow in relationship over the last couple of years. It's been really beautiful. We're in a really diverse area in terms of culture and religion. And so it has brought up space for us to have some of these conversations. And it's just been a joy. And some of them, I think one of the things that I want to make sure that I emphasize during this time is that, some of the context that I've worked within has been more planned and creating a space, but a lot of them are very spontaneous. And so that's one of the things that I've sensed God, over the years of just be prepared to be generous in providing space. And so, making sure I've got my little art cart ready for if the kids knock on the door. And if I can't come out, setting up a little art space for them right outside my door so that they can still work on things and things like that. So just trying to be flexible and spontaneous with whatever's coming my way. So this has been an example of the most recent cultivation of creative time and space within my own world. But in order to kind of tell a bit more of the story, I want to take a few steps back. So about 12 years ago, 2010, I was in a very stuck place. I was stuck in bad habits and unhealthy coping mechanisms, and also a painful relationship that was unraveling. And I had a moment of looking up to the heavens and struggling to let go, and just asked God, who am I without all of this? And he immediately answered by speaking straight to my heart, you are mine. And though I had been seeking God for years, this was a clear turning point of surrender. I was deeply touched by this calling me to himself and offering me an invitation of worth and purpose and identity outside of what I was trying to do by the world's standards. My heart cracked open to the calling and to the possibility of his transforming love. And from there, he began the process of cultivation, of weeding out and tending and cultivating the soil of my heart. And our relationship grew deeper roots. My trust in him began growing too. And as I started to better understand God's heart for me, I began to see that he had been with me throughout all of the different highs and lows of life. And I also observed a theme that he seemed to use these creative outlets in my life to help me navigate through especially dark seasons. So as I began to pray more and just kind of reflect, I noticed all of these a variety of creative outlets that had been throughout my entire life. In middle school and high school, it was through music and singing, getting through difficult times. In college, through acting and dance and choreography. Post-college, getting involved in community theater and visual arts, and more recently picking up the ukulele and writing and songwriting. I can't choose. But I think there's a reason for the multifacetedness of it all. And so not long after I had that experience with God calling me his, I had a worship pastor who took me under his wing and began to mentor me on how to use my creative gifts to serve the Lord. My creativity and my love of the Lord were kind of two things that I saw as compartmentalized and not things that could be intertwined. And so he was the beginning of helping me see these could be, used together. This is beautiful. And it set me on a trajectory for learning more. And so as I prayed and asked God how I could serve him, now that I knew that I was his all along, it just took me a little while to get there. I sensed it was to use art to help people. And as I pressed further into prayer, I did get a sense it was this really clear sentence of cultivate creative time and space and see what I do. See how he would naturally and organically kind of make things happen. And so I thought, okay, that sounds like a very interesting prospect, and it would lead me down a path of learning to trust him with the outcomes. So we'll take a little bit of a pause here, and I'm reading a book called Dare to Bloom. It's Trusting God Through Painful Endings and New Beginnings by a woman named Zim Flores. And chapter 1 is entitled An All-Weather Purpose. And I'm going to read you a passage from it. But I think, I want to connect this a little bit with what Byron was saying earlier with, what is your assignment? And I loved the way that this kind of unpacked it with this thought of like an all-weather purpose. What's our all-weather assignment? And then what are our seasonal assignments? Because it can, it takes on different forms as time goes on. So let me read you just a little bit about what she says about purpose. Purpose has become a popular topic these days, and finding one's purpose has become such an obsession that there's hundreds of resources to help us discover it. When people reference purpose, it tends to center on what I like to call the all-weather purpose, or the every season purpose, one that is large and meaningful and spans a lifetime. And sometimes we spend a lifetime trying to uncover it. We read books about it, we dream about it, we create vision boards for it, we even pray about it. And for some, with ample time spent with God, we uncover it. But for many others, a sense of purpose may completely elude us. A lesser known, equally powerful concept is one that uncovers a purpose in each new chapter of life, also known as our seasonal purpose. This type of purpose is specific to a finite period of time. It may span a few weeks, a few months, or a few years. Our ultimate purpose, what God has placed on us on this earth to accomplish, cannot be found apart from him. We can read all the books on purposes, we can journal from morning to evening, we can take courses and talk to counselors, but God's purpose for us can only be covered in him. Whether you know your seasonal purpose for right now or you're struggling to grasp the magnitude of your all-weather purpose, remember that God simply desires a life submitted to him. Your identity is not in who you are, it's in who he is. It's not what you do, it's what he did. And it's not where you live, it's where he dwells. And yet we're compelled by him to move into whatever purpose he's given us. So I guess I just wanted to kind of give us a few questions to ponder, of what has God revealed to you about thinking about it through that like all-weather purpose, and or your seasonal purposes, because that's, as I've reflected upon, and created this presentation, that made sense for what I want to share. And then also there's a preparation piece too, that I wanted to talk further about, of how has God prepared you to serve through your story, your skills, and your circumstance. And oftentimes we can see the preparation period only in hindsight, but other times you may be able to kind of see it in progress as well. So let me share then a little bit about my own preparation. And before we go there, so Lord, I lift your name on high, and the potter and the clay. So what does this have to do with anything? Anybody remember that song, Lord, I lift your name on high? I've got some nods in the room. Yeah, that song, just, he came from heaven to earth to show the way, from the earth to the cross, my debt to pay, from the cross to the grave, from the grave to the sky. Lord, I lift your name on high. I will never forget that chorus. That chorus spoke to my creative 16-year-old heart in a way that paved the way for the gospel to take hold, seed planted in the garden. And I also, after that, started to go to a local church. And on Monday nights, they had a potter who would talk about God and our relationship to God, and how he was the potter and we were the clay. And he would, and again, more seeds planted. That was like one of those moments where I was just in wonder, thinking about, there's this God that it's just blew my mind. So not long ago, I told a friend about these early faith growing experiences, and she pointed out how interesting it was that I was now creating art in process during sermons. I hadn't even considered that. Sometimes we need others to hold up that mirror to help us even see what God has done in our own lives. And so this was part of the preparation period for me. What started out as not being able to sit still in church due to anxiety and restlessness, I just couldn't hear, and I really wanted to listen and absorb. I started doodling in my journal, and I was pretty subtle about it. I just kind of brought my sketchbooks in and, did my doodles. You can see the doodles here on the left, just a few examples. Doodles, and took notes, but it was a way for me to really be able to listen and take in what I wanted to learn about God. So started journaling in my started doodling in my journals. God transformed that private practice. It was about 7 years of doing that privately. And eventually a pastor found out about it. He said, well, would you feel comfortable like doing that in front of, like, during the sermon? And I always think it's really funny when people ask those questions, like, would you feel comfortable doing this thing? And it's like, no. But when it's like one of those things where it's just like, but that makes so much sense for like how God and I have been, working together in my prayers and things like that, as far as what I feel like he's calling me to do. So it's like, no, I would not feel comfortable. And yes, I'm going to do that because that sounds like something I ought to do. So So what turned out, or what started as doodles kind of turned into these very large canvases of painting during sermons and telling the story of what Jesus has done for us. And then eventually was also asked to sort of illustrate sermons in progress. And I thought, well, that'll be interesting. That's going to be an interesting way to sort of think through the sermon. And the thing that was so neat about it for me was that I had people come up to me afterwards who speak English as a second language and explain how helpful that was for them. And I thought, how neat to be able to provide that so that somebody could, hear the sermon. I couldn't hear the sermon, in the beginning when I was trying to do the doodles, and then to be able to provide something that would help somebody else hear the sermon better. So, I share it because I do think it was a preparation period, but I also love it for the sake of God can take our weaknesses, he can take our pain and, make it into something beautiful and useful, and not anything that I ever would have conjured up myself. So he's very creative. Well, some things that I learned through that process is to bring what you have and who you are. I always had a little bit of a wrestling match with God, with my own pride, when I was invited to share one of those canvases, because I wanted to make it about me and what I could create and what could really illustrate the sermon. And I was really convicted by considering, who was I really doing this for? Was I doing this as worship for God, or was it to impress people? And so he used that refinement within my life. It also taught me to release outcomes to him. So control. I love to control things. And I, with my pastor's kids, we've done this before, where it's like, when I want to control something, they're like, this is what it feels like, and they said, they look like little raccoon hands. And so we talk about, when I'm feeling like, oh, I need to, control the outcomes of something. It's like, oh, let God smooth out those little raccoon hands and be open-handed with the gifts that he's given me to raise it back up to him. So I don't know if that will be helpful, but that's helpful in our little conversation, our conversations. Don't have your raccoon hands. Because it taught me to release the outcomes to God. I don't know what somebody's going to see or be moved by based on what I create. It's up to him. And he uses the creative process in transformative ways, not only for the person creating, but also for those who are experiencing it in process as well. So these lessons being a good preparation ground for stepping further into ministry. I went to a class at my church and I got to know one of the pastors better, and he found out I was interested in art and creativity. And I had kind of this thought of cultivating creative time and space in my mind. And so he suggested we start an artist community. So I jumped on that immediately. I was like, that sounds like something I want to try and do. I don't know what I'm doing, but let's go. So I was partnered with a staff member, and we created a logo and a mission statement and a plan for gathering people to just begin creating together. And I thought there would probably be about 300 people at our first gathering. There was one, and one is always enough. And as we began, we continued to invite artists of all kinds to join every month, and it grew. And it started with me taking a suitcase of art supplies and books and food, just to create a space so that we could come together and create together and encourage one another. And we engaged. So the examples that I have here in terms of the pictures is a specific project that we were working on. So the church asked us to work on something specific for creating a space for Easter that would be reflective and interesting. And so I don't know how we landed on this project, but we decided to spray paint water bottles. It was a very accessible project where you could cut them into the shape of a flower and kind of, put little accents and things like that. But the great thing about it is that it was accessible. And so we could bring the entire church pretty much and invite them into creating it together. So it was kind of a community building experience. And so and had a symbolism to it as well. It's just like that which was tossed aside could be made into something beautiful. So we engaged as a church in the creation of this art installation, from the youth groups, the small groups, etc. Stayed after, late after church and worked together to make it happen. And it eventually went on the road to some public spaces and was later donated to a women and children's shelter. So working on the projects like that together fostered relationships that I've now carried on for years, and are ultimately what has brought me here today talking to you with ACT. So cultivate creative time and space and see what God does with it. So let me share just a quick video to give you a taste of the art installation of when it was moved to one of the public places. So hopefully you'll be able to hear it.
The studio is a group of artists and creative types of all different ages, all walks of life, and we get together on a regular basis, usually a monthly basis, and come together and create together. We work on individual projects and group projects and collaborate with one another, encourage one another. It's essentially creative time and space for people. So many times, I feel like every day I talk to somebody who says, "Oh, I'm not creative, I'm not an artist," and yet we are. We all have an art that we do, and we're all creative in the way that we live our lives. And Redemption Garden is a result of us coming together and working as a community of all different types of strengths. And it started out as just an idea, and we just started cutting these water bottles, and we thought we were going to start with maybe 200 and see what that looked like, and then it ended up being this giant 2,000 water bottle project, and touched so many different hands and really brought our community together and expanded it. And it's been such a beautiful experience to see how our garden has grown and our community has grown as a result of this project. So that's all I want to say. What else can I say?
So a few things that I learned from that experience. When you have that kind of diverse group of people, just trying to find that balance between structure and flexibility of the environment, and just kind of meeting people where they're at. And the middle one being, don't let the activity of ministry take priority over your relationship with God. Probably one of the most important things that I've ever learned in ministry. It's just, don't forget your first, I don't know that I forgot my first love, but I think I just got so wrapped up in kind of the busyness at times of what ministry could be, and sort of jumping ahead and getting excited about things that, I have a counselor who says, take your marching orders from God. You stay really close to him, and so just drawing back to that posture of I am a follower. I'm following your lead. I'm not showing you my plans and telling you what you're going to do. I'm asking you what you'd like for me to do. So humbling experiences. And also, community is messy. I had so much to learn about leadership in those days, and still have a lot to learn. Reading a book called Our Character at Work, Success from the Heart of Servant Leadership, which is excellent. Would highly recommend if you're interested in reading these types of things, but always wanting to learn to lead better and care for people better. So, being humble, ensuring that you're engaging in a healthy praying support system who can help you navigate any bumps in the road is imperative. And one of the things that happened with this community is, we were meeting for about 4 years, and it came to a screeching halt because of some health crisis in my life and my family's life, job loss. And if I was to do it all over again, I would have done a better job at kind of communicating what was going on and transitioning the community more intentionally. So lessons learned. So just take a moment, to consider in your own life some of the things that you've learned in your own ministry, and anything that I've shared here is resonating with you. All right. I know we're kind of running out of time here, so I'm going to start to pick up the pace. So from there, kind of that open-handedness of like, okay, God, what are you going to do with these different things? I through Open Studio, I found out about a local conference called Intersections Art and Faith in our area. So Manuel Luce is a creative arts pastor in California, and he had kind of started gathering artists and musicians and creative types together to start having some of these conversations, a similar type of feel as the gathering here. And so I got involved and met some great people, and met people who are part of ACT out in our area and had been with ACT for a long time. And so that was great, and have cultivated relationships with them over time. And then I learned, there were a lot of people that were interested in using their creative gifts to serve the Lord. And that when we have these intersections, that oftentimes those connections can be transformative and lead to relationships, which can lead to community, which lead to you doing life together with people. And so wanted to share an example with you of that. And Tiffany is actually with us on the online gathering today. But I met Tiffany through Intersections, and she eventually joined Open Studio. And so just a dear friend of mine, she started with ACT in 2020. And so I've been on her ministry accountability team since then, and have been kind of walking alongside of her with Artists in Mind for many years now. And the mission that her organization has is to honor the dignity of individuals living with physical and cognitive challenges by nurturing the strengths, hope, and joy through creative and spiritually engaging experiences. And so she works primarily with those living with Alzheimer's, engaging them in discussions around artwork and visual Bible studies, and also offering spaces to actually create artwork. So being alongside of her since the beginning of that, and also a part of her ministry accountability team, we were dear friends, roommates for years, and I've just learned so much from her about what it means to offer creative time and space for some specific needs. And she modeled how important it is to listen well and to provide presence and to notice and to respond to needs. Helped me to understand that as independence declines, that extending dignity through simple choices is so important to connect with people. And so getting to see her in action prepared me for the next season of cultivating creative time and space, which was within my own family. So my calling became more personal when my dad, Paul, and my adopted grandmother, I adopted her from church, Dorothy, both faced terminal diagnoses within the same year. Same year I was laid off from my job, I faced my own health problems and surgery. And so Open Studio had to stop. Cultivating creative time and space scaled back. And I was grieved. I'm like, Lord, you've given me this thing that I'm supposed to do. And I yearned to continue to provide creative time and space. And he showed me it's going to look a little bit different in this season. So within this season, it looked like nurturing the creative time and space with them during the time that they had left. And so that's when taking up the ukulele, learning some of their favorite songs, learning how to respond to needs that I learned, through Tiffany's ministry. We hosted sing-alongs for family and friends, and music was that language that, just goes beyond what words can express. And I learned how important it is to listen for the quest. And the quest can be really simple. So when I say quest, just listening for like, what will be meaningful to you in this season? And for Dorothy, it was to create this tile that would go on the church, wall that we attended, that I took her to. So made sure that she had the materials, and we were able to do that before she passed. With my dad, he wanted to trailblaze, make a little trail up to the rock so that he could overlook his property and the sunset. And this was, once we had to move them, this was a day where I made sure he could fix the sprinklers, because that was so meaningful to him. So it's like listening for those little things to engage and make something meaningful for folks. And also grieve creatively. So I think a lot of the grieving process that we had with them was through offering the songs as gifts and, hosting the sing-alongs and things like that. But then even after they passed, I had taken a lot of notes during that season and was able to kind of compile them into a poem that I later shared about 9 months later at a spoken word event. And it was very meaningful for me, but then also was meaningful for others who had recently lost loved ones. And so this is, there's many ways that we can cultivate creative time and space for our family members, but this was just kind of a meaningful season for me. And it was just such an eye-opening experience, season of realizing sometimes we do have to let go, but the all-weather purpose continues on. It's just a new season. And so that's some of the way that God helped me see things a bit differently through that time. And then after they passed, these more personal experiences motivated me to continuing cultivating creative time and space for people in new ways. But grief is exhausting for those, you probably know that, for different seasons in your life. And I didn't want to commit to starting anything. But I really wanted to serve. And so looked for ways to serve. And in our area, we do have a winter shelter that will bus neighbors experiencing homelessness to host churches each night during the winter months for a warm meal and a place to stay and breakfast in the morning. And so I had signed up to be kind of an overnight supervisor. And as I was leaving my apartment to go, I had just that nudge to bring the ukulele, bring some art supplies and see what would happen. And I was a little bit nervous about it. I tried to kind of sneak them in and thought, well, I'll just go out and kind of see what it's all about before I do that. And I just got this sense of like, these will be the icebreakers that set the tone for the entire evening. So just do it. Okay, I'll do it. And I literally rounded the corner with my ukulele, and it was like, oh, you have a ukulele. So we sat around tables together and were able to sing and play music with the guests. And as time went on, again, kind of listening for some of the, specific interests and needs that people had. They wanted to create a community canvas. So we made that happen. So that was kind of a creative time and space. And one of the things that I've learned is that offering song can be really powerful, and not as a performance, but truly like as a gift, maybe even one-on-one. So I noticed that specifically as I was on a walk one day and I took my ukulele, and there was a man in a parking lot that like ran after me and said, "Can I have a song? Can you play me a song? I need a song really bad." I said, okay. And so asked him a few questions about what was going on and, if he had any specific requests, and he didn't. And so I just kind of came up with something, and he just closed his eyes and he just wept during the entire song. And he opened his eyes and said, I really, really needed that. And so I think, if I had been more prepared for something like that, I've never had that happen to me before. I probably would have asked more questions or, offered to pray with him, but he was kind of on his way. But I've experienced that at the winter shelter as well. Just music and art can really act as a doorway to open up really good conversations and conversations that I don't necessarily know how to navigate. So I'm praying in the moment of, Lord, show me what you want to say here. A couple more quick examples. And it's like, I could talk about, I think, within context, I've talked about, within my own neighborhood, talked about within a church setting, talked about, within my family and within the homeless shelter. These next two are just examples of where I've seen others cultivating creative time and space that I've gotten to be a part of. So I'm a part of a small church plant that's intentionally small, micro church, and it has an emphasis on missional living. And we have Blessing Sundays where the last Sunday of every month, we don't meet as a body, but we pray about how God would have us be a blessing to our communities. And then we come back together and share stories and talk about what God has done, through the week. And then Village on the Move, this is an example, and shout out to Kylie and Claire on this one. There's an epic theme song to Village on the Move, but I'll have to sing that for you next time. But this was a way during the pandemic where we brought worship to people's patios. So we did Village on the Move and brought worshipful experiences for people's patios. So that is a little bit about what I've learned at Village. And then lastly, there's a group of multi-generational women in my area that have found each other. And we meet on a monthly basis. We call our group Sikona, I'm Here to Be Seen. And we write around a theme. And through the creative writing, we come together, we share meals, we share our stories, we share prayer, care, celebrations, and griefs. And through that, we practice, some of them have been trained in attunement and containment and repair of rupture. And so there's this intentionality and sort of pastoral care that we're learning about and engaging with each other. And so that has just been a huge blessing as well. But, there's just, coming together around food, around story, again, cultivating that creative time and space. So all of that to say, it's now cultivating creative time and space for creative visionaries, missionaries, and ministers through ACT International. And so I'm so excited to, be on the journey with you now, and excited to see that whole, concept of, well, let's see what God's going to do with this as we cultivate creative time and space with one another. And so these were, I know we're running out of time. These were the reflection questions that I wanted to be able to have us thinking about is, now that we've sort of defined out what cultivating creative time and space could look like, it's how might you cultivate creative time and space, or how have you in your ministries? Maybe it's something that you've already done, but you haven't thought about it within this kind of paradigm before. Or how might we cultivate together as an ACT International community? I feel like that goes along with what Larry was saying earlier of like, let's get, imaginative. Lord, what are you going to do? What shall we do together? How can we continue meeting? How can we encourage one another? Do ministry together. So I said I was going to leave some time for questions, and I lied. I'm sorry. But that is pretty much the end of the presentation. So, but if you do we have 1 minute. So let's do anything that resonated with you, anything that sort of stirred for you through this time, or any questions that anybody does have. Maybe we could go 5 minutes more.
You got a 10-minute window. Depends
Okay.
whether you need to use the bathroom or not.
Okay.
Be downstairs by 3:10. That's up to you. Hey, I love the all-weather adjective that it fit in with Vision with Banquet, with the vision video about, are you all in?
Are you okay with coming here and saying it here?
Sure.
I want to. Sorry, Guy was saying something. I want you guys to hear it online.
Oh, hey guys. Oh, look.
Sorry, putting you on the spot.
Paul and Marnie. Hey. The all-weathered language. I love that, because are we going to have the tenacity to stick in there through thick and thin and not abandon, right? As soon as things get tough, we abandon our call, right? And I just love that idea of what is our all-weather purpose. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Guy. Anything else for those in the room or those online? Gary.
Okay, so it sounds like these creative things you're initiating are, I'm trying to speak up.
No, it's okay.
It sounds like these things you're initiating are more on your initiative. You're starting at scratch. Have participated in other things that are already ongoing that you show up, where you don't have to get momentum as much as just participate in a light in that purchase. I mean,
Yeah. Good question. So Gary asked, these spaces that I've talked about are more of things that I've initiated, but are there spaces where I'm able to enter in
They've already
that
been
have
created.
already been created? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say intersections was one of the
Yeah.
spaces. So that was one that I was entering into. And then I think, Village Church there, although I've been walking alongside of them in that, but yeah, I mean, being a part of ACT is a blessing for me because this has been going on for a long time and I'm excited to kind of,
I mean,
be
to think
here.
like in the community, or the various communities that we find ourselves, there could events or whatever would have to generate all the work
Mhm.
to generate interest from it. So participate. They're looking for to yes, any. So,
Yeah, definitely. So he's saying, are there spaces where I'm participating? Yeah, I don't know. I need to think about it.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
last night there was, I think it was last night or before, or last time I came from the wrong. There was something out on the streets.
Oh, an art walk.
Art
Yeah.
walk, yeah.
Yes, I have. Thank you. Yes, we have kind of like a art walk in Folsom, and I've taken my easel out there. They have live artists painting on the street and things like that. So yeah, there have been different things that I've been able to participate in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Question. No, I feel like I've been thinking about the things that I've been part of the cultivation process, but yeah, that's a good thought of like, well, what other things have already been cultivated that I've been a part of? So yes. Oh, Erin. Okay.
Okay, I'm just wondering, because I've moved from Canada to United States. I started my clown ministry and everything there. I had to start all over. And I found that part of creating community is coming in and being part of community and getting people to know you before you can move out. And I find that is one of the most important things. So how would you start going out of your comfort zone and going in and being established so that you're able to create what you're doing? Because I'm now working with 3 different churches down here, or 3 different communities, but it's the same thing goes. I started where I know full gospel, and then I went to found Water of Life, and now I'm with Refuge, and that's how I found it's. I had to integrate with people, get to know people, and them to get to know me before I could, clown around, so to speak.
Definitely. Yeah. I would say that's, yeah, you've got to cultivating those relationships is key. So but it takes time. Yeah.
Yeah, it really did. It took me 8 months, which was easier than first establishing the ministry.
Yeah.
And I think that you have to meet with people in communities that that you can adapt, that have similar minds, not similar people, but similar minds before you go. And that's really a hard thing to do. I mean, we started raising money in the United States, and it's a little bit different than raising money in Canada. So, and then we did outreaches, and it actually wasn't in California, it was in New York. But it's just those kinds of things. And if I went to Nashville before I joined ACT, nobody knew me. The only reason I got a chance to see ACT is Byron knew my son, and so invited me out. And before you know it, I got a sense of community, and I went there to thought that maybe I could get clowning and there, and nobody would open their church. But then here I have one dining session with Byron, and the next thing I know it, I'm in ACT.
a common story.
And he took me out for Chinese food, which is normal for a Jew to have Chinese food.
Nice. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Aaron. Glad that you were able to join us today. And yeah, I know it's especially when we're doing things that are outside of the box, it can be challenging to find our people. So encourage you in your continued cultivation of relationships in your new space. So, all right. Well, I've got to let you guys go, but I would love to keep the conversation going. I hope that this spurred on some good thoughts and things to chew on, and I look forward to talking with you more about it. Thanks so much for joining. All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks online. So glad you were able to join us.
Anybody find a bathroom break?
Yeah, great, super great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stuff downstairs. Find Katie at ACT International.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yes.
Is that her department? Is that her department?
Hi. Thanks so much for joining.